all those documents now.
Okay, great, thank you. And just I touch upon your statement just briefly in relation to who you spoke to before you came into today. You spoke to the authority, is that correct?
I spoke to 3 groups of people. The authority, Mr. McHenry on the committee, and Arthur Cox, who held the records of the authority.
Okay. Did you speak to any of the former board members of when you were CEO? Okay.
I did watch the presentation and the information that Mr. Bradshaw gave to this committee.
And Ms. Moylan?
And Ms. Moylan.
And Ms. Lampkin?
Yes, I researched all of them.
Okay, thank you. We heard at a previous meeting that there was a July council meeting in 2006. And the council meeting being separate from the board was a meeting with the local interest groups. And at that meeting it was suggested that the authority might involve itself in the Poolbeg site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that where you then got authority to approach a potential developer to come in on a bid with the authority?
Yes.
Okay. And what were your writing instructions for that?
My writing instructions were to explore the possibility of us purchasing this site in joint venture. And why that was done was that, as I said in my statement, the purchase of this site had been on the agenda for quite some time because the site beside it had been bid upon by the authority in, I think it was 1997 before I joined. The authority had failed to achieve that site. So it always had earmarked the purchase in this area. And of course, this master plan had earmarked this site as a development. So my writing instructions were simply do nothing but explore the possibility.
So how did you go about doing that?
Well, there were two ways we could have done it. One was to purchase it ourselves. And very quickly I looked at the valuation that had been completed, the independent valuation, and realised that was not possible. And the second way was to do it a joint venture, which was in our Act, and we had done many times before. So I discussed with the chairman some names that I would approach. And the criteria for choosing those names were, was the developer trustworthy to deliver community gain? Was the developer capable of dealing with one of the biggest sites in the city? And was the developer interested, obviously, in developing such a site? And also, was the developer someone who had a renowned reputation for delivering high-quality development? So there were my criteria, and I came up with very few names that would fit that criteria.
Discussion with Chairman Lord Bradshaw.
That's right.
And when did that take place?
Just before, that would have been September, I would have thought.
September?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Before or after the board meeting in September?
After the board meeting in
After the board
September.
meeting in September, okay. And what were the list of names that you gave to him?
Well, the two I can definitely reveal are Sean Mulryan was the #1 candidate for various reasons that fit all the category there, whose exemplary developments in London were achieving international acclaim. And 2 was Bernard. Well, I didn't produce a second name until the first one dropped out.
So when you had that discussion with Lord Bradshaw in September, you proposed a couple of names?
No, I actually,
just
sorry
the one
to correct
name.
that, just one name at that stage
Sean
because it
Mulryan.
was an outstanding candidate.
Okay, and did you know Sean Mulryan at the time personally?
No, I'd never met, heard or seen him other than on television.
So how did you approach him?
I rang his office. I asked, could they get in contact with him? I think some days later he called back because I couldn't get his private number, and we agreed to meet.
And where did you meet?
I think in our offices or his offices. I can't be certain.
And can you remember when that took place?
It was somewhat time between the board meeting in September and the 3rd of October.
And when did you first inform the chairman that you'd made contact with Sean Mulryan and that you were meeting
I
him?
would have thought within hours of me speaking to him.
Okay. And did you inform anyone else on the board?
No, we had no board meeting until the 3rd of October.
And did you inform anyone else in the executive that you were meeting Sean Mulryan?
Yes, I informed one of the executives. It was 7 years ago, so I can't tell you who exactly.
But it would just be, would that be in the context of I'm going to a meeting or we are thinking about doing this?
We're thinking about doing this. Well, we already knew, the executive already knew we were thinking about doing this because, of course, we started talking about it in July. So it would have been one of the executives.
Okay. And then, just in terms of arranging board meetings, would any substantive communications occur between the board outside of an actual board meeting?
Yes, I would have thought so. I mean, I wasn't a member of the board. I'm one of the few chief executives who wasn't a board member. But the chairman was, as he indicated here, incredibly communicative with all board members. So I had no doubt that he had communicated this to somebody. And I established that at the 3rd of October, because it was clear to me at that meeting that many people knew what I was raising.
So when you raised it at the 3rd of October, and this is one of the things we were trying to clarify earlier, was you were talking about Sean Mulryan?
No, Sean Mulryan dropped out pretty quickly. So
Sean Mulryan had dropped out?
Yes, by the 3rd of October.
But you'd met him probably towards the...
I had met him towards the middle of September.
Towards the middle of September, okay.
Yes.
And he dropped out pretty quickly. I mean, was that a one-off meeting and he didn't seem interested?
That was the last time I had met him, actually. I met his staff, and that was the last time I met him. He phoned me. He didn't meet me to say he couldn't proceed with it. And his reason was, and I totally understood that, his main focus was London, still is, and to move an operation of that scale, again, one of the biggest sites in Dublin, he would have had to set up a whole new team in Dublin, Ireland. I accepted that and immediately rang the chairman to propose a second name.
Okay, but did you actually meet Mr. Mulrine personally?
Well, yes, at the very first meeting.
Very first
yes,
meeting.
yes.
And was it just one meeting?
One meeting is all I had with him, yes.
And there was a second meeting with his staff?
I think maybe 1 or 2 meetings with their staff.
Okay.
I went to their office once with my team, my executive team, and they came to our office.
Okay.
And that was about exploring valuations, which I had in mind.
Were you keeping minutes of those meetings?
No, because I wanted to report the meeting to the board. I reported it in full. And because it was exploratory and nothing arose from it, we simply dropped the issue with them. That developer dropped out very quickly.
They dropped out?
They dropped out, yes.
Okay. And then, so you then informed Mr. Bradshaw that Ms. Mulrine was no longer in the picture?
Yes, I think within a few hours of being informed, I rang Mr. Bradshaw and we discussed whether we would proceed any further.
Okay.
And I said, I have a second name to propose to you. And the reason I proposed Baron McNamara was fourfold. One, I had just joined the authority, so I'd never met or heard of Mr. McNamara other than through the media. But I had seen the records within my executive of the joint venture that we'd already done in Docklands with Mr. McNamara. And the first issue criteria I laid down was trust and development of the community, and he had delivered on both of those. The second one was capability. He was the biggest developer in Dublin. The third one was exemplary developments. He just finished Shelburne, and that was highly lauded, Shelburne Hotel, by many people as a great restoration. So I felt I should put it to the chairman to possibly explore a deal with Mr. McNamara. I felt confident that was there. I'd ruled out so many others on that criteria. I felt that was right.
And did you know Mr. McNamara personally?
Never met him, never knew him other than his media profile.
So in that same conversation with Mr. Bradshaw, where you had informed him that Mr. Mulrine was no longer in the picture, you suggested to Mr. Bradshaw that you would approach Mr.
Yes, because I thought about it before I rang Mr. Bradshaw and said, I need a name. And that was the name I determined.
Okay, and so what happened then when you got off the phone from
So
Mr. Bradshaw?
the chairman said, well, we have a board meeting coming up. Try and find out as much as you can about whether this is still a possibility or not. And quite honestly, this was coming close to the 3rd of October and tenders to the 26th. I was more or less ruling out that this was possible at this stage.
So at this stage,
We don't have 20 days left.
late. So it was already in October, was it?
We're already very, very close to the 3rd of October, probably just the end of September.
And in your head, you thought that it wasn't going to be possible to make a bid.
I thought that was very close for such a big, high-profile tender.
Did you say that? Did you say that to Mr. Bradshaw?
Yes.
In the phone conversation?
And he was equally reticent about whether or not we could achieve it in the timescale.
Okay.
Yes. We had started too late, basically.
Okay. Then you approached Mr. McNamara.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Again, I rang his office, which was Grattan Business, and asked to meet him. And this time I went to meet him in his office with his team in Ballsbridge.
That was?
I would think close to the end of September, and I can't be absolutely sure.
Okay. And how many meetings did you have then with him prior to the meeting of the board on the 3rd?
So on the 3rd, I would have had probably one meeting with Mr. McNamara and one with his team, with my team and his team.
And after those 2 meetings, you were satisfied that this was something that could be brought then to the board?
I believed I should report to the board all of my dealings to date, and also, what were the issues? If you look at the 3rd of October, there are many issues being explored there, and I wanted to bring all the issues to the board on a formal record of the meeting.
But when because I want to come to the minutes and the paper that was there at the board in just a moment, but it was your impression that when you sat down for that board meeting on the 3rd of October, that the members of the board were already aware that you had discussions with both Mr. Mulrine and Mr. McNamara, or just Mr. McNamara?
I would say they didn't know who I had discussions with until that meeting. Perhaps.
Discussions.
So I wanted to raise it at the meeting. But secondly, it was my impression when I walked into that meeting and raised the issue that many were aware that we were exploring this possibility. Yes.
The board met on the 2nd and the 3rd of October, is that correct?
I have the minutes of the 3rd. I don't have minutes of the 2nd.
But I'm just looking at the paper here from the 2nd of October, Poolbeg site, development site of Poolbeg.
I don't have that. If there is a meeting on the 2nd, I'm not aware of it. So if anyone has that, I'd like to see.
Sorry, no, just if we look at the paper to the board, development site of Poolbeg, this document here was prepared on the 2nd of October, sorry, for the meeting of the 3rd.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
And that meeting on the 3rd took place, that was a meeting abroad, was it?
If perhaps the members here could commit, it doesn't say on it, but I think it was abroad, yes.
San Sebastian, yeah.
San Sebastian.
I think we went over that with Ms. Moylan when she was in
Yes,
the
that's correct.
previously.
That's correct.
So before the meeting of the 3rd of October, you decide to prepare this paper on the Poolbeg site, and the author of that paper is Mr. Mulcahy, I think.
Yes, my team. It wasn't, he signed the author, but I was fully involved in the preparation of that paper.
Okay, so that paper was prepared as the team that had been involved.
Absolutely, I was fully involved in every word of that paper.
When you prepare a paper to the board, what is that essentially? Is it?
Well, what you must do with a board is to put out all the information you as the chief executive have, and any analysis that you have to date. Now, notwithstanding the fact that we were still at the exploratory stage. So, as you can see, that I covered everything from tender procedures to valuations, to strategies, risks, negatives and positives, SWOT analysis, planning schemes, etc. We want to put out everything that we had, and I think we successfully did that.
Did Mr. Bradshaw ask you to prepare that paper, or was that something you did
this was our own volition.
Okay, and in the minutes from the meeting of the 3rd of October, where it talks about you discussing the IGB site, you say the chief, or it says, sorry, I beg your pardon, the chief executive briefed the board on the confidential negotiations that he had undertaken with the developer, who had indicated an intention to bid for the site.
Correct.
So, just to clarify then, in the actual discussions, I mean, it's not recorded here in the minutes, but did you inform the board that was Mr. McNamara?
No, I didn't give the name because he had asked me to keep it confidential because others were bidding for the site in this early exploratory stage. We want to both keep our options open. But can I just make it very clear that I had to describe his background to the board members.
It would be obvious to them.
Both Ms. Moylan's evidence is what that she inferred it, and I had no doubt that everybody there inferred it, who I was speaking about. But I had to keep my word, and I didn't say it, but I did give enough information for everybody to know who I was speaking with.
Okay. The wording of the minutes is interesting. A developer who had indicated an intention to bid for the site. It's in paragraph 3.1 under IGB in the minutes. You had approached Mr. McNamara because you had thought he would be a good candidate to go into a joint venture with, yes, and you'd informed Mr. Bradshaw of that.
Yes.
So you then approached Mr. McNamara, and yet the way it's written here, it's as if the developer had an intention to bid for the site. We were aware of that, or the authority was aware of that, and that the developer then confirmed that he would welcome the involvement of the authority jointly in the tender. Were you aware that Mr. McNamara was interested?
Absolutely. This is absolutely correct. When I rang Mr. McNamara, whom I had never met or knew, I said, we're thinking of bidding for this site and we would like to explore the possibility of joint venture. He said, I'm already considering bidding for it.
He said that.
Yes.
Okay, so he
and
was already...
he said actually the words, I have been looking into that myself. So I worded that exactly as he had said to me, so that the board were aware of it.
Okay. Now, but the meeting of the... just going back to this paper of the development side of Poolbeg. So you have those discussions with Mr. McNamara and you have those two meetings, and it's getting on very quickly. Obviously, we have this deadline of the 25th of October for the bid. You prepared the paper to the board on the 2nd of October for the meeting of the 3rd of October, which was a meeting abroad. But in that paper, it's quite clear, actually, that you are making recommendations. I mean, if you look at the page 5 of that paper, presented to the board on the 3rd of October, conclusion and recommendation. 11.1, decision. The board was to authorise the executive to approach a suitable developer in line with option B above. The option being that the authority selects a developer of high calibre, etc., for the joint bid. So, I mean, when I look at a paper like this, paper to the board, it's just one of the questions I have. I mean, you have a conclusion and recommendation already in the paper.
What paragraph are you reading, Deputy, please?
I beg your pardon. It's paragraph 11.1 and 11.2 on page 5.
Absolutely. What I had to do was to get authorization from the board, which I hadn't had to that date, to explore the possibility to approach, it's worded very carefully, to approach a suitable developer in line with option B. It isn't, as you like, as I think you'll acknowledge, a decision to go with that developer.
Open up the actual bidding process. You had authority from the July council meeting to approach a developer to explore the possibility.
Yes.
And this was then a decision that you would actually go and have formal negotiations with Mr.
Yes.
McNamara.
Absolutely.
On a bid.
That's what I interpret that to be.
Okay. But at the beginning of that paper as well, though, in the summary in paragraph 1, it does say that the executive recommend that, if possible, the authority should get involved with the development partners in development of the site if it is to achieve in full measure its objectives under the master plan for the Poolbeg area. So you, as the CEO, was recommending to the board that you go ahead and bid for this site.
Yes, and the words are possible because there were so many parameters we had to choose. It was not a recommendation to proceed yet, to bid. It was not a recommendation to proceed to bid.
No, but it was, I mean, it was a recommendation that the authority do get involved. I mean, bearing in mind what would be discussed in the actual bidding arrangements.
Yes, I acknowledge that, yes.
It was your belief that you should do this?
Yes.
Despite the concerns you might have had with Mr. Bradshaw previously on the phone when you thought perhaps you were going too quickly or had started off too late?
Yes, but the words there are highly caveated. In other words, if possible, and then the caveats are laid out fully in the negatives and positives later on in the paper. But what I was recommending there, that essentially is what the decision on 11.1 was asking, that I explore this possibility. But if you're asking me, was I certain on the 3rd that this is what we should do? No, I wasn't. I was not. No.
Okay. Because, I mean, when Mr. Bradshaw was before us, he did say that in his evidence that the executive was clearly and unambiguously recommending that we should proceed with the purchase and that the board acted on that advice.
But in fairness, he was talking about the minutes of the 20th of October. He referred to
Yes, I'll come to those minutes in just a moment. But by the 3rd of October, it wouldn't be the case that the board, or sorry, that the executive was pushing this strongly to the board.
Not the actual bid. What we were pushing, if that's the word you want to use, with all the caveats that what we were pushing for is to explore that possibility.
Okay. And at the meeting on the 3rd of October, what discussions were held in relation to the potential valuation of the site?
Yes. So on the 3rd of October, just to give you the background, Deputy, so if you'll allow me a moment to give you the background, we'd obtained an independent valuation in, I think, June 2005. And we had our own RICS professional surveyors in the authority who updated that valuation for this subcommittee that you referred to earlier of the 5th of October 2005 to do with the port's involvement. In that meeting, we had, and just let me explain briefly how that valuation worked, is that we had a full valuation, and I just have a copy of it here, from an independent RICS valuer who put into that all the parameters that one would put into valuing a site. So everything from office investment, income and expenditure, acquisition cost, construction cost, cost of debt, etc., is in that report. And what we ask our professional valuers to do, which they are certified to do, is extrapolate the parameters. So what we did, we extrapolated the parameters. And what are the 3 parameters that we extrapolated? 1 is plot ratio. 2 is the number of hectares per unit, on the number of units per hectare on the site, which you'll see in that report. And number 3 is the comparability of sites that are selling in the area. And in my introduction, I mentioned that sites had just sold for 40 to 50 million an acre, and we were bidding 20 million an acre. So I had a team. On my left was a barrister who was 20 years working with the authority on property engagement. On my right was a finance director who had done all the development with IGB. Behind me were good bodies advising me, and I had CBRE's valuation report. Also, in the minutes of the 3rd of October, you'll notice that we took informal advice from the market. So putting together all those parameters, I reported on the 3rd of October that the site would vary between 300 to 350 million in terms of the extrapolation of these parameters, which the CNAG said during Mr. Bradshaw's presentation was something that would be common practice to put in parameters. Now, these parameters are not put in by some amateur method. They're put into a program called the Circle Time RICS program, which is very expensive, but we had on site because we had a full development team. And this printout comes from that. So I was able to bring to the board all of those criteria that we were using together and explain to the board why it would vary. And that's what I did.
I want to come back to the valuations actually in just a moment. I want to stick just with the minutes of the 3rd of October and the paper there. So it's the 3rd of October. The paper is presented to the board. This is the first time the board has heard that actually there is an interested developer, someone who the board can approach to go into a joint venture. And they have a detailed paper prepared for them, development side of Pool Beg. In the minutes, paragraph 3.2, it says that after a careful consideration of the proposal, and subject to being satisfied that the proposed involvement of the authority in the tender process and the future development of the site would not breach public procurement rules, the board agreed that the executive could open negotiations with a potential tender partner with a view to formulating a joint bid. How quickly did you move then to open negotiations with Mr. McNamara?
I'm sorry, what was the last?
How quickly did you move to open negotiations or begin negotiations with Mr. McNamara?
Immediately that day.
Immediately that day?
Immediately that day,
Okay.
yes.
And at the same time, you then moved to get assurances that you would not be in breach of public procurement rules?
Yes, we instructed in our Goodbody lawyers to produce a procurement report, and they had one criteria, to do so in advance of any bid by the authority. So we were clear in our procurement rules, and we did.
In advance of any bid, but not in advance of opening negotiations with the
No,
Mr. McNamara?
it just wasn't practical or possible to do that because, one, we had 20 years of doing joint ventures behind us in the authority. The entire Port Gas site was developed that way. And two, in order to parallel these, while not committing to the authority to a single commitment, and this was very important, we were able to get the procurement advice. And it was our desire, and indeed our final achievement, to have that procurement advice before we committed the board or the authority to any decision.
We're wrong to interpret that they were looking for that assurance before you actually opened negotiations. Subject to being satisfied with the proposed involvement, etc., the board agreed the executive could open negotiations.
No, because 3.2 says very clearly that the proposed involvement of the authority in the tender process, and that involvement would not come until we make a bid. It wasn't involvement in open negotiations. I think the board agreed that the executive could open negotiations immediately.
Immediately, that's the board.
I believe so.
Okay. I don't think that's clear from the minutes, actually.
Okay, I accept that. There may be some interpretation of that, but I think both Mr. Bradshaw and Ms. Moylan, if asked, would agree with that.
On the 2nd of October was the first letter to the department regarding approval for Dublin Docklands Development Authority borrowing. So you went ahead and you sought approval in relation to this site in that letter on the 2nd of October.
On the 2nd of October is the initial...
A formal letter comes on 12th, yeah.
Correct, yes.
So what were you doing on the 2nd of October?
The 2nd of October, I believe, is asking permission simply to open discussions about our borrowing and bank loans. And I'm looking for the letter, but I think that's all that was doing.
So you're anticipating...
Oh, no, I'm sorry. There are two letters to the department. One is the 27th of September, and the other is the 12th of October. So perhaps you're referring...
I have a letter to Mary Moylan at ASEC, 2nd of October.
Right, okay. Okay. If you could bring that down, please. Thank you. Yes, I acknowledge that letter, and perhaps if we could go to the end, because I'm reading it as we go along. Yes, so this is looking to a facility for borrowing on the 127 million.
It doesn't specifically name the IGB site, but that's the site that you have in mind when you write this letter on the 2nd.
Correct. Yes.
So you were anticipating a positive decision?
No, to be fair, although this is dated the 2nd, we wouldn't have sent it until after the board meeting on the 3rd.
So you would have waited? So
absolutely,
you were...
because we had no authority to do this.
Okay.
We just drafted the letter so it would be clear in our minds what we were going to say.
Okay, so that would the board be successful, then you could then
Correct.
send a letter? But,
correct. It wasn't sent until the 3rd.
But you were anticipating a positive decision by the board then?
I was anticipating a positive decision to explore, which is all we were doing. And really what I was running was, we'd only 26 days, was running a parallel process without committing us to anything. And this was a parallel process.
At the beginning of that letter it says, as discussed with you, the authority is now seeking approval.
Yes.
So you had a conversation with Ms. Moylan?
Yes.
What was the purpose of that conversation?
And to be fair, I would have thought this is why I think the letter is just a day out. I think it's the 3rd of October. I think I would have discussed that with Ms. Moylan immediately after the board meeting, or perhaps just before the board meeting on the 3rd, which was in San Sebastian, as I've heard, and therefore we would have been either talking the night before or talking just before the board meeting. That's probably where that came from.
So is the second a typo?
I think so.
I think the second on
I think the typo, sorry, I think the second is correct. It was written on the 2nd, but I'm certain it wasn't sent until after the board meeting on the 3rd.
So you were anticipating a conversation with Ms. Moylan?
No, I'd already discussed with her, so therefore, yes, it was either a discussion the night before or a discussion in the morning of. So the 2nd could be a typo. I mean, 7 years ago,
I said that at the beginning, but I'm just trying to get some clarity around the sequencing here.
But I would have discussed with Ms. Moylan what we would write, because I'd never written such a thing before.
Would you have had a discussion with Ms. Moylan prior to the board hearing about the actual proposal?
I don't think so, and that's why I think that's a typo.
Okay.
I would never really discuss anything with a board member before a board meeting. I'm fairly certain I didn't discuss this with her until the 3rd.
Okay, so we'll have to put that down as a typo then if it wasn't your practice.
I think you're right. I think your analysis is correct.
Okay. So if we look then, and I apologise for jumping between documents, it's just that there's a few documents around the same dates. Because we're moving into the process of seeking ministerial sanction, and it's quite important. If you look at the POOBEG site report of the 3rd of October, it has 3 different valuations in it. One stating that the tenders will reach 400 million, which is based on informal advice of letting agents. Which letting agents were they?
I don't know. What I did, I had just joined the authority, and I asked the Director of Property, who was there, Mr. McCahey, in fact it was probably his suggestion, to phone around and see what was happening in the market, which is very important. We had worked with virtually all the property agents in the development of the Boardgash site. So I had never worked with them, so he'd be familiar with all of them. And I believed he phoned probably the top 4 or 5.
And that was where you got the figure 400 million from?
Yes.
Then there are 2 other figures. One is 300 million, and that's based on a valuation conducted by the authority in the previous year, in 2005.
Yes, and our own valuers extrapolating that valuation, which they put in a document, which I have here with me, that was extrapolating the different parameters to see how would the valuation change as you change those parameters.
And the 350 million, which was the 3rd figure in the 3rd of October POOBEG site report, was based on the price paid for the ready-mix site at East Wall. Sorry, in the minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, the second page.
I think that's only one of the inputs that would have affected that. That's a comparative. I did say comparative price comparison was one of the, but we also had the circle time program, and I have here a figure of 336 million that program printed out on the 5th of October, and would have printed out, over that period or just prior to that period. I don't have access to those now, but that's where I would have got them.
So, in preparation for the meeting on the 3rd of October in San Sebastian, you prepared the POOBEG site valuation, or the POOBEG site report, which is 3 valuations. You also prepare a letter that you send after the meeting, although it's stated incorrectly, which is looking to find sanction to enter into this venture and also to increase the borrowing. And in that letter, you talk about your expected delivery or return of circa 15%. If you look at,
yes.
So what were you basing that return on?
The standard return for all valuations is 15%, expected by developers to be your return.
Okay.
How you base the valuation.
And would that be the return to the joint venture or to the authority?
Joint venture.
To the joint venture.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we move then from the board meeting of the 3rd of October. There is another meeting then on the 20th of October. But on the 12th of October, which is the letter that you referred to in your opening statement, you write to, the 12th of October letter, what is the purpose of that letter that was sent?
What is clear is in between the 3rd of October and the 20th of October, there emerges some emails which I have here from the Arthur Cox data room, which says that the authority, this is from the official in the department to my team, saying the authority must produce a case, not a case, but a formal sanction letter for the minister, sanction to approve borrowing limits. And because they'd been talking to my officials were there for many, many years, had dealt with the department. I delegated and instructed them to go ahead and seek that sanction based on what the department were asking us to put in the letter.
So the letter of the 2nd/3rd of October is sent,
yes,
and
yeah.
following that, an email exchange commences.
Yes.
Okay, and that's indicating or instructing you as to how you will go about seeking formal sanction.
Yes, and it appears from the emails there were verbal contacts as well.
Okay.
Between that official in the department and my officials.
And would that official in the department be Ms. Moylan, who was also?
No, her deputy.
Her deputy. Okay. Yeah. And then following that, this letter is sent on the 12th of October, which is the letter officially seeking sanction, and it's actually referred to that in later minutes.
Correct.
In the documentation. Now.
Sorry, I wonder if I could maybe just come in here to be of assistance. The Department of the Environment wrote on the 4th of October 2006 to the Department of Finance, following on from the letter, or at least this is the what's evident here. It was a letter to the Department of Finance drawing Finance's attention to the fact that the authority wished to extend their borrowing limit. And the emails that Mr. Maloney refers to and the engagement was basically a request from Finance to basically put up a case to support the application for extension of the thing. I think that just may be helpful. If you like, there was another party in the discussion at that stage.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. But you said in your opening statement that you didn't draft the letter of the 12th of October.
Or didn't see it, or didn't sign it, which is more important. There's a different signature on that letter.
Did you know that the letter was being issued on the 12th?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
And who didn't write the letter?
Who did write the letter?
Yes.
The official, the property director, Mr. Mulcahy, who subsequently reported that to the board.
So Mr. Mulcahy wrote the letter of the 12th.
And it's on email tracking, which is on the DDA's Arthur Cox website, that he copied the letter to Mr. Higgins, who signed it. And that would have been very normal. I was dealing with the shareholders' agreements, heads of terms. They who had dealt with the department for many years were doing with that. And we saw it as a procedural matter.
Would it be normal that you wouldn't see the letter, though?
No, not necessarily, because I had delegated that to them. They knew they would show it to me, and eventually they did show it at the board meeting of the 20th, I believe it appeared. And that's when I saw the figure of 220, and of course I set about correcting it immediately.
Is this the first time, though, that the authority was writing such a letter to seek such sanction?
No, they've done it. I mean, they would do it every few years. I mean, they sought the sanction in 1997 and 2003 when they were doing the gas side. I wasn't there at the time, but they did that.
2003?
No. I joined just before this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that letter was sent, and just in relation then to the contents of the letter, it says in that letter, a valuation prepared by the authority indicates that at a reasonable density of commercial and residential development, the value of the site could be in excess of 200 million. That's a lot lower than the three figures that were in the paper of the 3rd of October.
Yes.
And then you then go on to say, give an estimated bid figure of 220 million.
Yes.
So why were those two figures in play in this letter of the 12th of October when Mr. Mulcahy was clearly aware of the three higher valuations that were being discussed on the 3rd of October?
When we raised this at the board meeting of the 20th, or at the 24th, Mr. Mulcahy made it very clear he'd put that in because it was the current formal independent valuation the authority had. Where I saw it was an error, and I think it was obvious Ms. Moylan saw it as an error, was that the words in the region of should not have been used. The words excess are used above, and it should have been used below as well. And I think it was construed to be an error because it simply was using the book value. It was also construed that it was in no way meant to be misleading the department, because the emails are clear. The immediate email that came back from the department after that letter, which is not mentioned in the CNAG's report, from the department official, not to me, because he knew I hadn't been involved in it, he talked about process but never mentioned that figure. So the department were not building, as the Assistant Secretary General in front of you has confirmed, and she's a woman of the highest integrity and experience. She confirmed she was not making a case to the department or to the minister. She was looking for a borrowing requirement and the ability to, or the sanction to join a joint venture. And this is her evidence. So obviously I wasn't privy then, but having read her evidence, I'm now privy to that. And that's why nobody between the 12th and the 24th corrected the letter until I and Mr. Mulcahy raised it to draw her attention to it before the ministerial sanction. And this is critical. This is not mentioned in the CNAG's report. Now, could I, Deputy Murphy, if you'll just indulge me for just a moment, explain why I'm so exercised by this? Because for 3 years, the media have been saying I wrote a letter. And there have been some suggestions of, a lack of integrity in trying to mislead somebody. It's clear, and I just repeat this, there is no formal legal record in any semi-state or state body than the minutes of the executive board meetings. There is no more. You can have all the reports you want, but that is the formal legal record that the CNAG, I draw his attention to that now. And I don't wish to cast any aspersions on him, but I have to pull this together. And that states that we informed the highest official in the department that the figure was wrong in advance of the ministerial sanction. And there's a second issue here, Chairman, that I have to emphasise. And Ms. Moylan has been very honourable and honest to the committee in saying this. She was not only representing us, representing the department on the board, she was also within the department the person responsible for getting that ministerial sanction. So any suggestion that I should have somehow or didn't recognise that I was informing that highest official, formally and legally, that the figure was wrong and must be corrected immediately in advance of that section, obviously I'm here to correct that. And secondly, I'm here to say that the probity and integrity of everybody involved was never to mislead. This was a highly close, this was a highly experienced team on both sides. And Ms. Moylan has, I think, very clearly said to this committee, she never saw it as a conflict. She said that here on this particular issue. And secondly, she said, and again this is minuted, that she was the same official seeking that sanction. And thirdly, she said that she did not construe it, other than the fact that she was building a borrowing case, not a business case. Sorry for spending the time doing that, but I had to give...
No, I appreciate that. I mean, we've jumped ahead a little bit, but I'll stay on that point.
Sorry,
in terms of the meeting of the 24th of October.
Sorry, Deputy, but I come in again. Just a document, a letter from the Department of the Environment on the 17th of October 2006. It basically is responding to the request from Finance in relation to more detail. And under the heading of proposed site acquisition, it says, and I quote, "Evaluation prepared by the authority indicates that at a reasonable density of commercial and residential development, the value of the site would be in the region of 220 million euros. It then goes on to talk about the financing requirement for it. And it says, under this scenario, the joint venture partner would hold at least 51% of the equity, again at a cost of 60 million. The intention is that the remaining debt financing of circa 100 million required to complete the acquisition would be secured against the property to be acquired and arranged and borne by the JVC. Now, the significance of that is that at that stage, I think it was proposed that there would be a 50-50 partnership in the joint venture, requiring the provision of 120 million by the partners and 100 million of borrowing, which equates to 220 million. So I think I would have to disagree that the case, while it was certainly a case in support of the application to extend the borrowing requirement, it was couched in terms of a venture that was priced at 220 million. That has to be the construction that's drawn from that letter, which was sent on the 17th.
If I'm allowed, Chairman, to respond to that, Deputy Murphy, there's a very important issue here, that we corrected that figure before that official went for ministerial sanction. This is the important thing. Having seen between the 17th and the 20th that the wrong figure was being used, we corrected it, and you stated in your report, Controller, and this is not casting any aspersions, there's a lot of documents here. In your report, you stated we did not formally correct that with the department. I am saying to you, honestly and openly, that I have investigated every single document here and spent my time to do so. I have found that on paragraph 8.3 of the minutes of the board of the 24th of October, in advance of sanction, we corrected that figure. Now, and both of us are right.
No, I'm sorry. I would just also have to draw attention to, because we followed the papers that went right the way up the line. There was a submission on the 19th of October 2006 up through to the Minister for the Environment. And it, again, is based on the same information. It refers to the value of the site of about 220 million. And it was, the final recipient was Rooney Ara, and the Secretary to the Minister, who marked as follows: discussed with Minister, he agreed in principle, subject to, I think, approval of Minister for Finance as required.
That is correct, but you're referring to the 19th. What I have to continually say to Deputy Murphy and this committee, we did not bid until the 25th. Ministerial sanction didn't issue until the 24th. At 8 a.m. on the 24th, formally and legally, I informed the same department official that there was an error in the 220 million, and I corrected it. We're not disagreeing here. I accept your interim letters, but the final legal correction of the authority's position, and you're referring to a letter that came from the department, not the authority, the final legal correction of the authority's position took place at 8 a.m. on the morning of the 24th of October. And the Minister's representative said, we have not yet, we will issue sanction later that day. And in front of this committee, she has stated, honestly, that she recollects and does accept that we corrected the figure on that date. And Mr. Bradshaw also said this to you. We're not disagreeing here. I have to, from my representation, absolutely give through evidence to this committee that I corrected it in advance of ministerial sanction. And that's what's important to the integrity of me and my team. And my record that I have with me shows that. And you are not disagreeing with that record, paragraph 8.3 of the 24th, are you?
No, except I think the reference to the sum it looks like a typo. It refers to a valuation of some 250 million. I presume that should be.
And everybody acknowledged that.
But which had been included in the authority's submission to the Minister.
Glad you're not correcting my statement that the paragraph 8.3 does correct to the ministerial representative. The valuation was now 375 million.
But I think, sorry, Deputy, I think we've always drawn attention to the fact that the departmental representative on the board was in a position where there was a documentary trail, and that she had progressed and made representations to the Department of Finance and to the Minister that this was the value of the site. And I would understand that to mean that the department sanction was based on those representations. But at the same time, she was aware, as were all the other members of the board, that a considerably greater sum was being discussed. And I think that is the conflict of interest that any public servant may find themselves in.
I'm sorry, Deputy Murphy, but I have to just, Chairman. You say it's a conflict of interest, but when Ms. Moylan appeared before this committee, which is on public record, and I think it was Deputy Murphy may have asked her the question, did she perceive that as a conflict of interest, this specific role of being on the board and being the person who was going into the Minister to get that sanction? And she stated, no, I didn't see it as a conflict, because my role was to increase the borrowing, not make a business case. So I think, rather than delay the committee, I think from my perspective what I came here today was to correct the statement in your report, Controller, that says the department was not formally informed of the new figure in advance of ministerial sanction. It was. And my timing, 8 a.m. the 24th, meant that that official had every opportunity to go back to the department, which she did, and she had every opportunity to correct it. She honestly said she didn't need to, because if you have correctly said the borrowing was no longer 100 million, it was only 50, so she didn't feel we were exceeding borrowing limits. I have to, Deputy, make that point.
I appreciate that point, but I think it is recognised by the department as a conflict of interest, because those two positions have now been split.
Correct, but I'm just giving her evidence that
No, no,
on that specific decision she didn't see it as a conflict.
But, and just, I mean, just to step back just a little bit, because the letter was sent on the 12th, and in this communications begin seeking sanction on the particular percentage for a particular deal, on a particular plot ratio and site mix. On the 20th of October, there's a board meeting, but none of, if that letter seeking sanction isn't discussed at the meeting on the 20th of October.
No, and of course the reference to the CNAG is a letter of the 19th of October by the Department of Environment to the Department of Finance. Wouldn't have been seen by us.
So then when you discussed it actually on the 24th of October, and it is noted in 8.2 in the minutes there, Mr. Bradshaw believes that amounted to formal notification to the department of the change in circumstances because Ms. Moylan was there, and you clearly believe the same. Ms. Moylan in her evidence also said that she was satisfied that the decision did not contravene what the minister agreed, but she also said that she didn't report back from the board to the department. So she was making, I mean, does one conclude that she was making a judgment call herself?
Sure. But you can understand that I can only make my judgment calls of what I did formally and legally.
So what prompted the discussion at the meeting of the 24th of October?
I had seen the letter was wrong. I had seen it between the 20th and the 24th, and I immediately stated to the official, why did you first of all put in that figure? Because I hadn't seen the letter, I didn't sign it. And secondly, and I wouldn't have signed it. And secondly, I wasn't going to pick up the phone and ring Mary Moylan like some sort of a backyard approach. I believed this had to be formally and legally informed, not just Ms. Moylan, but the whole board, that this mistake was made.
So you were preparing the board pack for the 24th, was it, of documentation? That's when you came across the letter of the...
Yes, somewhere
12th.
Between those dates. I mean, obviously I'm not certain which date,
Okay.
but it was somewhere between the 20th and 24th.
But you see the difficulty in the fact that you didn't look at the letter before it was sent, and yet by the 24th of October, as far as the department's concerned, and it's the day before the bid, and the day of sanction, they are working with the wrong figures.
Correct.
Because you haven't looked at the letter.
Correct. And I mean, I accept that. I will take full accountability. And by the way, I'm not pushing accountability to my officials. I delegated. The responsibility is mine. That's absolutely accepted by me, and I don't want to cast aspersions on any other official. I accept full responsibility. But my key point was that I had corrected it legally before the ministerial sanction.
But the meeting, so you informed Ms. Moylan when you informed other board members at that meeting on the 24th of October that there was a mistake in terms of the letter that had gone in on the 12th. And you received sanction for the bid on the 24th.
She did indicate she was still going to issue. She indicated at the board meeting she was still going to issue the letter, despite the new circumstances. And she gave evidence to this committee why she decided that.
She indicated that at the board, that she,
Yes,
that she as the department, was going to...
Well, if you look at her evidence, she actually said that in her evidence to this committee, that although she accepted this new information, she still decided. Now, this was 8 a.m., and the letter issued at about 1 o'clock that day. So she had in that 4 hours, she had decided, I can't say when, to still proceed because, and to be fair to her, the borrowing was less than the sanction she'd sought from the minister.
The board meeting began at 8 o'clock on the 24th.
Correct.
What time did it conclude?
Very quickly, I would say 1 hour, 9 o'clock.
This is a phone call board meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
So we can take it that she's calling from, or she's in her office in the department. But she says as a member of the board that the department is still going to issue sanction. How do you not see that as a conflict of interest?
Well, I'll accept, Deputy, that the word conflict, which is used many times in relation to this board, is a matter of the code the department operated under. And as someone who has never been in a department, I came outside from a completely different sector. I didn't have any idea how they operated. And secondly, this person was on the board for many, many years. And, you know, I had been to the department once or twice, was clearly one of the highest ranking members there. I assumed, which I think is fair, that the issues of conflicts, the issues of how the procedures in the department were all been dealt with, oblivious to me. And it's not just an assumption, that in fact was the position as I saw it on the 24th of October.
Now, retrospectively, that's a conflict where you've got a board member sitting there and you're talking about a complete change in circumstances in relation to the deal. That they are sitting there in what is a relatively brief board meeting, given that you're going into it to bid the next day, and they say, don't worry, I'll take care of that.
Yes. Deputy, I would accept it was a conflict if the person sitting at that board meeting or on the phone was a different person to the person in the department who was dealing with the sanction. Then it may be that it was confidential for her not to say it to that other person, because there were several assistant secretary generals. But she was saying it to herself. She was saying it to the same hat. So that's why I didn't see it as a conflict. I mean, how can you have a conflict about telling yourself information that you've been told in one role and you now have to pass on another role? I don't see it as a conflict, and neither did she.
But she had to seek sanction from the minister. It wasn't her sanction to give.
Correct. No, I do accept
But
now.
and she also said that she did not report back from the board to the department.
Correct. And I do accept now, having read her testimony, and Ms. Talon, the Secretary General of the department, a department which I knew nothing about its procedures, that there is a conflict on all of this. But at that time, the roles were not separated, and I had to deal with that reality.
Mm-hmm. But as far as you're concerned, when you had this discussion in the course of that 1 hour phone call or teleconference board meeting, that was you giving formal notification to the department?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had no doubt about it.
What would be considered a complete change in circumstances in relation to the seeking sanction for...
Well, I was reassured by the fact that she said at the meeting, and I'll just look at the minutes to see, it's the 24th, she actually said at that meeting, let me just quote, certainly minuted, that the circumstances had actually not changed. Let me see, paragraph 3.2. It was noted that this figure was based on lottery and on the basis the authority would require. No, she doesn't say it there. But my recollection, and I don't think it's fair for me to give my recollection at this stage, it was so long ago. But certainly, Deputy, in answer to your clear question, I want to give a clear answer, which Mr. Bradshaw also gave. I had no doubt my formal notification to the second highest official in the Department of Environment that the circumstances had changed was, in my view, clear. And secondly, it wasn't the first time. At the 3rd of October meeting, valuations were being given between 300 and 400 million, at which the same person was present. So I was quite comfortable that the department knew, but I cannot comment on the internal workings of the department because I wasn't privy to them.
Comfortable that the department knew, unfortunately, because of the exchange of information that was going on right up until the 19th.
I accept that.
And because Ms. Moylan told us that she did not report back to the department what was discussed at the board.
Again,
how one manages that, I don't know, because it's the same person. Hence why we're talking about the conflict. But thank you, Chair. So the 24th of October, the bid is the next day. You have a 1 hour teleconference meeting. Earlier on in this meeting, you said that you, at the outset of the kind of exploratory talks with developers, that you felt it wasn't going to happen because you started too late. Your initial, I mean, sorry, we can go back.
I meant that it was my view on the 3rd that we'd started too late.
Yeah, for this to be successful.
Yes.
Surely if you look then at what has happened between the 3rd and the 24th of October, doesn't that confirm your initial fears that you were starting too late because it was also rushed? Because you're only having a 1 hour conference call on the 24th, and only then are you giving the correct information to the department for the sanction you would get some 3 or 4 hours later for this venture.
Well, no, Deputy, let me be very clear. It's my evidence here today that I believe as Chief Executive, who had a very professional team with me of valuers, barristers, lawyers, outside help, that between the 3rd of October, I had, to my satisfaction, examined every issue that needed to be examined. And specifically with regard to the department, I don't want to go over the department when again. I think I've given my evidence on that. But no, I'm very comfortable. I was in a position to recommend this on the 24th. Okay. I'm very comfortable.
Well, just on that then, because we did touch upon the valuations, and if we go to the board minutes from the 20th of October, there's a paper included in that meeting called the Site of Poolbeg Proposal for Acquisition. That was again drafted by Mr. Mulcahy on the 19th of October for that board meeting. Yes. In that paper, it has 2 different valuations are mentioned. Yes. One is 240 million from the 2005 work done by CBRE And the other is 268 million, which is a recent internal valuation.
Correct.
Now, that internal valuation, where did that figure come from?
So in our internal system where we had our own RCIS valuers and we had the circle time program, we ran a program, I have the evidence here, of various parameters. And that ran between 198 million and 350 million. The two specific figures I can't comment on because my recollection is not there. The one of the CBRE is absolutely correct. It was 2005. But we simply extended those parameters. Professional, nationally certified surveyors extended the parameters for us, and we produced those for the board. So I was absolutely satisfied. I had evaluations up to 375 million.
Going back to the letter of the 12th, where did this figure of 200 and 220 million come from? Because
that was the original 2005 valuation by CBRE.
But you already then, but at the time of the 12th, you already had three other figures mentioned in the
Correct.
3rd of October paper. And then in the 20th of October paper, we have another two figures.
Correct.
But I mean, the 2005 figure by CBRE is to the amount of 240 million. Yet the letter had 220 million as the...
I really, you know...
I mean, because we accept that you didn't look at the letter before it issued.
Yeah.
But you did say that the official would have been working off the internal valuations you had at the time.
I agree with you,
Yet on the
David.
20th of October, we see that you had an internal valuation for 240 million from
Yes.
CBRE. But that wasn't included in the letter.
I agree with you. There's a dichotomy there that I can't explain.
What was the person's reference points for that letter on the 12th of October?
CBRE valuation.
Not the 240 million one.
Well, that's why I can't explain the dichotomy of 20 million. I just can't explain it.
Okay, and the 268 million figure is referred to as being a recent internal figure. I must conclude, I suppose, that that was done after the 12th of October, that 268 million figure.
Correct.
Okay. But then just looking at the valuations that are in play at the moment, if I may, we have the 200 million contained in the 12th of October letter to the department. We have 240 million based on a 2005 CBRE valuation, and that's sourced in the 20th of October document. We have a 250 million figure, and that's actually a typo that's been referenced. That was in the minutes of the 24th. We have 268 million, which is an internal figure mentioned in the 20th of October document. We have 300 million based on the Dublin Docklands Development Authority internal 2005 figure, and the source of that is the 3rd of October document. Again, and we don't know why that wasn't referenced in the 12th of October letter. We have the 350 million figure based on the site sold in the east wall, and the source is the 3rd of October document. The 400 million figure based on the informal valuation from the letting agents, the source of that is the 3rd of October document. Excuse me. We have the 430 million based on McNamara's work, which is referenced in the minutes of the meeting of the 24th of October, valuation he'd achieved. And then we have the 412 million valuation, which was done officially after the bid was put in by CBRE. I mean, we're talking about 9 or 10 different valuations, 7 of which were being discussed in a particular three-week period, or had been calculated in that period. I mean, how do you explain the inconsistency?
I don't actually think they're inconsistent, Deputy. I was telling the team, every parameter that you can put into this, we need to be certain of our valuations. I wasn't going to accept one internal valuation and say, okay, guys, that's fine. I told them keep running every time we found out new information, and we were finding out new information all the time between the 3rd and the 20th. Run another valuation on the Circle Time program with the professional valuer. So these are not inconsistent. These are developing valuations based on these parameters changing. And the three parameters, again, just for the public record that I want to refer to, one is plot ratio, and now we were at a plot ratio of 3:1. The plot ratio we had developed already prior to 2005 was 3:1. The plot ratio since in the STZ, as you know, of the Dublin City Council, references extensively 3:1. So I believed then, and I'm certain now, that was a very reasonable valuation. The second one was the 247 units per hectare. That is the common standard. And thirdly, what's called comparative pricing. East Wall is mentioned, but so is the site that was sold in the South Quay just previously for 40 million an acre. It's not stated here, but it is stated in our recent submissions.
So you're running the numbers again and again, you're looking at the potential.
We had to constantly iterate, it was called. I had to constantly iterate.
At any point do you stop and say, well, what did we actually request from the department?
No, because I had been of the view that Miss Moylan had, is that we were not submitting to the department a business case for evaluation, which she has confirmed to this committee. I was of the view that we'd simply been asking for the 127 million loan approval, which she has confirmed, and the application to the Minister to become a joint venture partner. In the Code of Conduct